Hi again, this is Jeff, your ProtoPie expert answering your ProtoPie questions. Today's question comes from Jatine. Jatine says, first and foremost, ProtoPie is a fantastic tool. Thank you very much, Jatine, and you are 100% correct in that. He also goes on to ask, I'd like to create a custom screen transition like in the Gmail app, where I tap the search bar and it expands to fill the entire screen in transition to the search screen. I'm going to show you how to make a custom transition. Now, if we take a look at the pie here, I've got a mock-up of Gmail's app here. I've got a mock-up of the inbox, and I have a second scene, which is our search. And we make a transition from one scene to the next. You'll see if you tap the search, it does a jump, and if we preview this, and if I just tap there, it just jumps immediately over to the search screen, and if I tap the chevron, it takes us back. If you want to use any of the built-in transitions here, so for example, the fade, the pop, the slide in, none of those are faithful to the way the Gmail app works. It's actually a very elaborate transition from one scene to the next. If we open up the preview, you tap the search box here, it expands all the way to the top corner and down into the bottom corner, so it creates a white cover over top of the UI. The rest of the UI underneath kind of fades down underneath a bit of a veil. It's like it gets a little bit darker. The hamburger icon, it swings out of the way and the chevron swings into view. The avatar fades down and the microphone icon fades up. The footer and the compose button, they all move downwards. And I'm going to show you exactly how to do this. The key to this kind of thing, it's actually quite simple in concept. Essentially what we're going to do is we're going to animate all of our items to the point that we want them such that they match the search scene in the end. And we're going to do that and then delay our jump until the animation is done. So let's start with the base of the search box here, this box. Let's start by making it expand up in the top corner and down into the bottom corner. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to turn off the jump for now so we can just play around with our animation until we get it to look right. When I tap search, I'm going to create a move transition, and I want this to be on the header base. Now you'll see we have a whole lot of layers here, so if you're getting lost, just start typing, and we're looking for the header base one here. So if you type in, it'll shortlist it here. And I want to move it to X and Y 0, 0. So if we preview this and I tap, you're going to see it did move up into the top corner. Now let's also scale it so that way it fills up the entire screen. And our entire screen is 375 by 812. So we are going to scale the header base, and it was already selected, to 375 by 812. And if we preview that, now we should see it. There we go. Now it happens a little bit quickly, and you don't really see the animation. And that's because in the actual Gmail one, the UI underneath kind of darkens down a little bit. So let's make a veil that is invisible by default and then becomes visible as this animation happens. So what I'm going to do is underneath the header base, but above the compose icon, I'm going to make a new shape, like a rectangle, and just draw the rectangle any size. I'm going to make it black. I will position it at 0, 0. We'll make it 375 by 812, so that way it fills the entire screen, and we'll set the opacity to 0. And then in my tap event here now, I'm going to adjust the opacity of that veil to make it a bit more opaque. So let's use an opacity response. And we don't want the search prompt. We'll call this, we didn't rename that layer. Now it's always a good idea to rename your layers, especially when you have a bunch here. So ProtoPie made one called Rectangle 5. Let's rename it and call it Veil. And my opacity here, so I want to adjust the opacity of the veil. And let's set it to, say, 40%. And let's see how that looks now when we preview it. I'm going to tap in here, and there we go. Now you can see it expand all the way to the top. I'm going to run it again. You can see it expand, and the UI underneath kind of deadens down a little bit. So that's starting to work nicely. All right. Now you will notice that when I go from the inbox to the search screen, we should turn on the jump here. And essentially the way this works is the jump, we're going to delay it. And I'm going to do that just by dragging where it happens. You can also dial it in here with the start delay. And I'm going to change the start delay to 0.2, which is when these animations end. The duration is all of them at 0.2. And let's turn it back on. You're going to see that when I preview this and I tap in the search box, the search box moves up a little bit. And this is very faithful in the Gmail app. It actually just moves up just a little bit as it comes into focus. So let's take care of that. Let's move the search in mail box up, I believe it's 4 pixels. So it's currently at Y58, and in the search scene, it's at Y54. So let's move that one to Y54. So we're going to add a move response to the search prompt, and we're going to change it to 54. Now let's preview this again. And there we go. So that worked nicely. Let's reset it. All right, so you can see the search text box moved upward as we transition to the scene. Okay, now let's add a bit more of the pizzazz in here. The compose button and the footer, they all move downwards, and I believe the footer here is how tall? It's 75 pixels. So we'll move them down both 75 pixels. So that moves the footer all the way off screen and the compose button down in accordance with it. So let's add another move trigger. We're going to move the footer. And again, if you're having trouble finding whatever you're looking for, just search for it. We're going to move the footer, and I'm going to move by 75 pixels. Not going to bother trying to do some math here. I'm going to do the same with the compose button. Footer, and there's the compose button. Move by 75 pixels. Let's preview that again. All right, and then we did see, here, let's turn off the jump again while we finish the rest of our animation. We did see, there we go, we did see the compose button and the footer drop out of view as this opened up. All right, now the last thing we got to do is we got to add a little bit more fancy animation. So in our search, we have this chevron and we have this microphone icon. Microphone icon is an easier one to do, so let's handle that one first. When we transition from the inbox to the search screen, the avatar fades down and the microphone fades up, but in sequence, not at the same time. It's not a crossfade, so it's down and then up. So what we want to do is we're going to split our animation time in half. So for the first half, we're going to fade down the avatar. So let's add a opacity, and we're going to change the opacity. We're going to change it to 0. And the duration is going to be half of the rest of our animation, so 0.1 instead of 0.2 seconds. And then we want to fade up the microphone icon. But at the moment, we don't have the microphone icon. It's only in our search scene. So this is something you're going to need to do when you want to do these custom transitions. Sometimes you're going to have to copy a few elements from one scene to the other. So I'm going to take the microphone icon, I'm going to copy it, Command-C or Control-C on your keyboard. Go back to inbox, and I'm going to paste it. And then when you paste it in the scene, it puts it in the exact same location. So if I switch between the scenes, you're going to see that microphone is in the same position. Now by default, we want its opacity set to 0. So I'm going to set the opacity of the microphone icon to 0. And in our animation, I'm going to fade it up. So opacity of the microphone icon to 100. And I want it to happen over 0.1 seconds, and I want to delay it. I want to delay it so it happens after the avatar fades down. We can do that one of two ways. I can either set the start delay to 0.1 seconds, or I can just drag this and it'll snap in position as well. So when we preview this again, all right, we saw it went a little bit quickly, but you'll see when I tap that, the avatar faded down, microphone faded up. Okay, great. Now let's do the animation with the chevrons. The way it works in the Gmail app is the chevron swings clockwise into place, and the hamburger icon swings clockwise out of view. So it fades down as the hamburger icon fades in. And like we did before, I need to copy the chevron. So let's copy that, and we'll put it back into our scene over here. I want it to swing on its bottom right corner, so I'm going to change the origin point of this to the bottom right corner, and similarly I'm going to change the origin point on the hamburger menu to the bottom left corner, because I want them to swing on the same axis here. And then the microphone icon is going to be invisible, and it's going to be swung at 180 degrees. So I'm going to change the angle of the, not the mic icon, I want to change the chevron here. Change this to 180 degrees, and you're going to see it puts it into place there, and we'll change the opacity to 0. Now let's add an opacity and a rotate for the chevron. Opacity of the chevron to 100%. And we're going to rotate, here we go, the chevron. I'm going to rotate it by 180 degrees. And you can choose which direction you want to do it, and I want it to be clockwise, so I'm going to choose this first one here. And I'm going to do the same thing, but in the opposite with the hamburger menu. So we're going to change the opacity of the hamburger, and we're going to change it to 0. And I'm going to rotate the hamburger. Also rotating it by 180 degrees and in the clockwise direction. Now when I preview this, there we go. We have that animation happening. So this should be almost our entire transition. Let's turn this back on and see if there's anything we forgot. So when I tap in here, okay, the last thing is this divider. The divider kind of just shows up abruptly. Let's have that be a bit of a softer transition. So like we did before, we'll go here. We're going to copy the divider. I'm going to go back to my inbox and I'm going to paste it in place. Let's set the opacity to 0. And we will add an opacity response into our tap animation. We want the divider and we're going to set it to 100. And there we go. Now when I preview this, I tap search in mail. That is our complete transition. Now we need to make it such that it transitions back. When I tap the chevron here, it takes us back, but it takes us back into the state that I was at, which is what we want, because now we want to animate those things back from where they were, back to their original location. Now the interesting thing about this is ProtoPie doesn't give us an event for when the scene is returned to. We can restart the scene and we can have a start trigger, but we don't have a return to scene trigger or anything like that. But there's a trick we can use. And what we can use is a detect trigger, and we're going to detect a change in a variable. And an interesting quirk about the way ProtoPie works is it will detect a change to a variable even if it happens in another scene, but won't respond to it when you go back to the first scene. That might sound a little bit confusing, so let's just jump in and do it. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a variable, and that's in your bottom left. Tap it once to expand the variables palette. And I'm going to make this for all scenes. And this is important because we want to be able to set a value for this variable from either scene, from both the inbox scene and the search scene. So choose for all scenes. And I'm going to name this return from search. Return from search. Here we go. It's going to be a number, and I'm going to default it to 0. And I'm going to make a detect trigger here. And I want to do detect on return from search. And the way that detect works is it will fire anytime the value of return from search changes. And I want to do a condition on here. I only want to fire responses when the variable changes from 0 to 1. So we're going to do return from search when the value is 1. And anything under here will fire when our scene detects a change from 0 to 1, or from anything to 1. Let's go over to the search scene. And in our tap back here, we're going to add an assign response. And essentially, we're going to set our variable to 1. This will trigger the detect in our first scene. However, all these responses won't fire until we return to the scene. Interesting nuance of how ProtoPie works. So we're going to do this, assign it, and we're going to jump back to the first scene with our variable set from 0 to 1. And now I want to add in all the responses that are going to fire. And essentially what we're going to do is reverse all of these animations. But the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to reset the value of return from search back to 0. That way if we go back to the search, it's ready to be changed again. And this won't do anything unless return from search equals 1. So even though we've changed it, which will trigger the detect to fire, the condition that we have here is it only does anything if the value is 1. So if you change it back to 0 or anything other than 1, then this will still work, and it's only going to run these animations once. Okay, so the first thing we did was we moved the header base and we scaled the header base. We can use a reset, which will take care of both of these in one shot. So we're going to use a reset on the header base, which was already selected. It's on my scene, but if it wasn't, you can just search for it. Header base, we'll reset that. We need to, what was the next thing we did? The opacity of the veil, we can reset the veil. Reset. And again, veil was already chosen. This makes things quick. So if I click on the move here, we've moved the search prompt. We can reset that as well. Because I have it selected here, it's selected in my stage. And then when I add the reset, oops, there it is. It's already selected in my in here. So this helps speed things along. What else did we do? The footer and the compose button. We will reset both of those. Reset, footer. Reset, compose button. The opacity of the avatar, and we're going to make sure that we do these and we split the animation the same way. So I'm going to reverse the order. So first I want to return or reset the opacity of the mic icon. So let's do that. Reset the mic icon, and I want this to happen over 0.1 seconds. And then we are going to reset the opacity of the avatar. Reset avatar, and again over 0.1 seconds, but I'm going to delay it so that way it happens after the microphone fades down. What else do we have here? We've got the chevron back, we've got the opacity and the rotation of chevron back and hamburger. So let's reset both of those. The hamburger reset, and we want the chevron back. We'll reset those as well. And then the last thing we have is the divider. So let's reset the divider. All right, let's see how this looks. Search in mail. And if I tap back here, okay, so it mostly worked, but you notice my animation was a little bit wonky. And when I go from, let me reset this. When I go from the inbox to the search screen, both the hamburger icon and the chevron rotate in the clockwise direction, right? So it kind of swings around. But when I click back, they're rotating in opposite directions. The chevron rotates clockwise and the hamburger icon rotates counterclockwise. So we can fix that. So instead of using the reset, we can explicitly tell it which direction to animate in. So what I'm going to do is let's remove these two. So the hamburger one I'm going to remove, and the chevron back I'm going to remove, and let's copy our opacity and rotations here. Let's copy those. So I held down shift, by the way. Click the first one, hold down shift, click the fourth one, and that selects all four. Command C or Control C on Windows, and let's paste it into our detect down here. Now the opacity needs to go up to, we need to reverse the opacity. So the opacity of the chevron is going to go down to 0, and the opacity of the hamburger is going to go to 100. And let's just leave these rotations in place because it's going to rotate it 180 degrees in the clockwise direction. Let's preview this. There we go, search in mail. There we go, and let's click back. There we go. And our animation is working. Now, a small nuance that you need to understand, and this was already preset for you if you're following along with the sample file here, is that the search box is focused when the scene starts and the keyboard resulting comes up. The reason for that, because in the search scene there is a start trigger. And in the start, it calls this focus, and you'll see when the scene starts, the first thing it does, it focuses that field, and that triggers the keyboard to come up. If I turn that off, you're going to see when I preview this, the keyboard doesn't come up because that field is not being focused. And in order for that keyboard to show up every single time we go to the search, in my jump over here, I'm actually telling it to reset the selected scene. So that way, every time we jump to the search scene from the inbox, it's going to restart and fire that start trigger. But there could be a number of reasons why you don't want to restart the scene. You might want to leave it in the state that it was in. So what we could do is use the same technique where we used the variable here, the return from search, and instead of using a detect on this side, in fact, let's set that up. So we'll go to our jump here. Let's turn this off. And we'll go over here. Let's add a detect. Right? And we're going to set up a variable. We'll make sure it's for all scenes. We'll say transition to search. We'll default it to 0. In our detect, we want to detect changes in that variable, transition to search. The condition we want is when it equals 1. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take the item that's here in the start trigger. I'm going to copy that, and I'm going to put it in my detect here. And let's just turn the start off because this is no longer needed. We're not going to use the start. We're going to use the detect instead. And we'll go back to our inbox over here. And in our jump, let's do an assign. Assign, select variable, transition to search, set it to 1. And this is what's going to happen. When we transition to the search, we'll have changed the value of this variable. Oh, you know what? And let's spell this correctly, first of all. And here's an interesting thing too. When you change the names of variables, it doesn't update all of your triggers and responses accordingly. So we're going to have to fix all these. So transition to search, I'm going to set it to 1. And let's go fix it over here. We're going to detect on transition to search. And the condition will be when transition to search equals 1. So what's going to happen is when this scene becomes active, the detect is going to fire. It's going to recognize that the variable has changed the value of 1, and it's going to run our focus. We also want to make sure that we reset our variable. So we'll go assign, and we'll reassign it back to 0. If you don't reset it, then it won't detect another change, because what's going to happen is if this is still on 1, and here, I'll turn that off. I'm in my inbox. We're on 0. And when I preview this and I tap it the first time, it's going to change the value to 1. And my detect will fire, which is why we have the box focused. And then when I move back and I do it again, you're going to see, look, it didn't work that time. And the reason for that is because the variable didn't change. So we need to reset it back to 0. So that way when we jump, it changes back to 1 and that detect will fire. So let's turn this back on and we'll go back into our preview here. And now if I tap this and I tap it again, tap, 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 there you go. Easy as pie. If you run into a snag with one of your pies and you'd like to ask us for help, just check out the link in the description below. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.